As the world talks about the Iran war, some are looking at Russia's reaction. It's considered an ally of the Islamic Republic. So, will it intervene? Well, it's complicated. Although Moscow wouldn't want to see the Iranian regime defeated, it's not doing much to stop that happening. Let's look at why and how losing Iran could be a real problem for Russia. I'm Yuri Resheto in Riga, reporting from Latvia on Russia after the WS was pushed out of Moscow. And with me in the studio is my colleague Lisa Lewis, who's been reporting on Russia's stance in the Iran war. Hi, Lisa.
Hello, hi. Yes, and you know, it is interesting. The Kremlin has been pretty cautious in its actions so far, but when you look at the words, they have been harsh. Let us just take a look at some of the comments that have been made, first of all by Vladimir Putin, who has talked about the killing of Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, who was killed at the beginning of this war, and he said this was a murder committed in cynical violation of all norms of human morality and international law. There's also the Foreign Ministry that has issued a statement saying that the Russian Federation condemns the hunt for the leaders of sovereign states. And finally, here's Russia's permanent representative to the UN, Vasily Nebenzia, who said the launch of the war was an irresponsible step by the United States and Israel.
So yes, Moscow is clearly on Iran's side in this conflict, and more broadly, Iran and Russia, they see themselves as strategic partners. Lisa, you've looked into that particularly, and ideologically, I would say they both would be in line, right?
Well, yes, but it looks like an unnatural alliance nevertheless. You know, Iran is an Islamic republic. Russia isn't. Mind you, Russia's Vladimir Putin has forged ties in the past with the Orthodox Church, but it would be really wrong to call Russia a religious country. And then when you go back in time, there has been a lot of mistrust between these two countries. Russian leaders generally don't really like the Iranians. That's at least what a number of experts told me. And on the Iranian side, Iran has historically always considered Russia as an uninvited imperial power that was trying to take land and influence internal Iranian politics. So not really the best basis for an alliance, isn't it?
Yeah, but what links them is a common worldview, let's say, a worldview rejecting what they see as a Western-dominated global order, and they both argue to a so-called multipolar world, right?
Yes, they want to overhaul the current international order, but mind you, although they share that view, this is not a love match. They cooperate because both these countries are under international sanctions, so they have a limited number of options. Iran has been under sanctions for longer than Russia, and so Russia could even learn something from Iran. Iran has been teaching Russia how to circumvent these international sanctions. And on that basis, both countries have been cooperating and strengthening their ties, their links really, over the past few years, especially when it comes to economic and military links.
Well, that is a relationship Russia actually intends to continue. Putin congratulated Khamenei's successor, his son, on being selected to lead the country. He expressed, quote, unwavering support and solidarity with the Iranian friends. Russia has been, he said, and will remain a reliable partner of the Islamic Republic. Lisa, you mentioned the economic dimension of this bilateral partnership. It was just last year that Tehran and Moscow locked in that partnership with a formal treaty. It covered military cooperation, trade and research, and pledged mutual support under Western sanctions. Last year, they agreed to a 25 billion deal for Rosatom, Russia's Rosatom, to build 4 nuclear reactors in southern Iran. But the war has now raised doubts about whether Rosatom can deliver.
Yes, absolutely. You know, this is an important deal, although Iran is not Russia's biggest trade partner, even far from that. But there are also a number of other projects that the two countries are cooperating on, like one infrastructure project that Russia has been working on, and which is particularly interesting and important for its future.
And that is the so-called North-South Corridor, a trade route planned to stretch from St. Petersburg, the northernmost city in the world with over 1 million residents, all the way to Mumbai in India. It passes directly through Iran. On the map, the current transport route is shown in blue and the planned future route is in red. The goal is to give Russia more options to move its exports by both land and sea. But with everything is happening now, the question is, how much is that project at risk?
Well, that's a very good question. This project is really important for the Russians. The initial agreement for that corridor was signed back in 2000, and according to Saudi Arabia-based think tank Gulf Research Center, 70% of that route was last year already finished. Now, with the current turmoil, and even more so with the regime change, that project is likely, or would likely, grind to a halt. And the Russians are certainly watching that very closely, as Nikita Smagin has been telling me. He's an independent Azerbaijan-based expert on Russia and the Middle East.
Russia views it as a vital project in future for Russian transit security. I mean that, or logistic security. I mean that there are some additional transit routes for Russia to import goods through the Chinese territory, through Turkey. But Russia, after 2022, after the war with Ukraine started, and Russia had been cut off from its traditional transit routes through the Europe, Russia is now scaring of being cut from the other transit routes. So in this case, in this regard, Iran is viewed as a potential opportunity for building an additional route for goods, for transiting goods, and also for gas export.
Russia's economy wouldn't collapse if its projects with Iran are delayed or even cancelled, experts say. But it's already weakened by Western sanctions, so another blow would be tough to observe. So economically, we could say Russia and Iran are solid partners, but they are not dependent on each other. Let's talk about the military side now, another key part of this partnership. Lisa, earlier in the Ukraine war, Iran supplied Russia with Shahed drones that were very important, especially in the beginning of this war. They were so important that Russia is now making its own. Geran, it's the Russian name for this. There were also reports on other secret Iranian weapon shipments. If Russia got help from Iran in Ukraine, why is it not returning the favor?
Well, it's not like Russia is not helping at all. It is providing some weapons to Iran. There have been reports that Moscow has been sending, for example, military vehicles, helicopters to Tehran, also ammunition and intelligence. Actually, the Iranian regime recently confirmed that in the current war, Moscow was providing intelligence to Tehran indeed. And all this is based on that partnership agreement that we talked about earlier. But mind you, that agreement is not a defense alliance, and that is really the limit of that partnership. That's also something that expert Smagin has been pointing out to me when I was talking to him earlier. He said that Moscow does support Tehran, but that support has clear limits.
This kind of weaponry is not used to protect Iran from Israel or US. It's more about using it against rebels, for example, or for some other internal use. It's less useful for fighting foreign powers.
So the support Russia is giving right now is, really limited. Why isn't Moscow offering more, especially when Iran is clearly important to Russia? And looks like yeah, it could really use the help. Is that Russia simply doesn't have more to give, or are there strategic reasons for this, Lisa?
Well, both really. First of all, Russia has its hands full in Ukraine at that front, and the Ukraine war is also the reason why the Russian bear doesn't really want to completely antagonize Trump. The US president has been rather permeable to the Russian side of arguments in the Ukraine war, and there are fears that if Russia goes in hard on Iran's side, it might risk losing that silent backing, really. And what's more, a prolonged war in the Middle East could actually help Moscow and be detrimental to Ukraine. That's a point I heard from Grégoire Rousse, director of the Europe, Russia and Eurasia program at London-based think tank Chatham House.
The US president could not afford to sustain, I would not say another front because America is not fighting in Ukraine, but from a diplomatic perspective and military support, another theater. And in that case, it would prove a good thing for the Russian president. The second thing, obviously, is the kind of media oxygen that would grow thinner for President Zelensky, because everything is about Iran these days.
And surely Russia, as an oil and gas producing country, would benefit from higher prices, right? And also from, yeah, let's say, upheavals in the Middle East.
Well, absolutely. You know, if you look at prices, is a good point. If you look at the oil and gas prices, they have jumped since the start of the war, as Iran has effectively blocked the Strait of Hormuz, through which 20% of the world's oil and gas go. Oil prices and gas prices have been higher. They've come down a bit, but they're still above pre-war level, you know. And this is really good news for now, at least for gas and oil exporter Russia. Russia, as you know, has been under limitations through international sanctions to sell its resources, especially since the start of the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
On the first day of the Iran war, Putin's special envoy for investment and economic cooperation, Kirill Dmitriev, posted on X, $100 or more per barrel of oil soon. So yes, Russia would benefit from a long war in the Middle East, right?
Well, yes, that is at least something that the experts are saying and are thinking. They seem to agree on that. You know, President Putin has even come out in the past few days. He offered that Russia could provide oil and gas to Europe if the continent wanted to return to a long-term cooperation. Obviously, he seems to be hoping that even Europe might lift some of the sanctions imposed on Russia over the past few years. Mind you, if oil and gas prices really stayed very high for months or even years, that would provide an economic windfall to Moscow. That's also something that Julian Waller has been underlining. I've been talking to him. He's a research analyst in the Russia Studies program at US-based think tank Center for Naval Analyses.
That would be a major benefit to the Russian economy. It would be a major benefit to broader attempts at maintaining economic stability. Because, as you noted, the Russian economy is trying to sustain a war effort while not being in a full war mobilization. It requires natural resource spending and sort of the profits thereof in order to maintain the state budget. Now, Russia, because oil and gas prices have been so low, has had to tap into its domestic consumption dynamics as well, greater taxes and fees on its own society. So it's building capacity in that way, precisely because oil and gas prices have been so low, and it has been a considerable point of tension.
Well, and a long war in the Middle East distracts from the fighting in Ukraine, and yeah, it might even bring some economic advantages. But it's important to remember that Russia and Iran are essentially on the same side. If Iran is weakened, or if Russia loses Iran as an ally, That would be a setback for Moscow, especially now after two of Russia's key partners have been removed from the scene in just over a year. Syria's Bashar al-Assad, who fled to Moscow, and Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro, who was captured by the United States earlier this year. And the longer the war continues, Lisa, the more it will erode Russia's prestige
and standing in the world.
Yes.
Absolutely. It was quite extraordinary, you know, what happened to these two leaders, two allies of Putin's, and Russia was basically standing on the sidelines helplessly, couldn't intervene or wouldn't want to intervene. And what is happening, you're right to say, what's happening right now in Iran actually does the same to Russia's image. Moscow wants to depict itself as a great global power, but what we're seeing right now is that it's not really a great power. At least it doesn't have the influence, the power to intervene in this conflict very actively. That's also something that Gregor Roos from Chatham House was making that point.
What is certain is that Russia does not have the means to support the Iranian regime. The Iranian regime knows that. So at this stage, Russia is condemned to the role of spectator in a way. Very passive. They can only focus on their own battlefield. And I don't expect anything very bright for Russia in terms of regional influence. It might be the fall of another domino, not necessarily in the way we could envision today, but the Russian influence, as we have known it in the region, is most likely coming to an end.
So it seems Russia is between a rock and a hard place. It doesn't have the military power to help Iran while fighting its own war in Ukraine. And it doesn't want to anger US President Trump either. Yet, losing Iran as a regional ally would also be a clear setback for the Kremlin, despite some economic advantages the war seems to be bringing to Russia.
Thanks for staying with us while we were exploring how the Iran war is affecting Russia.
My name is Yuri Resheto here in Riga.
And my name is Lisa Louis.